Hello, I'm Lewis Montague. I study Level 3 Sports Coaching at North Huts College, and today I'm doing my presentation on the Unit 12 current issues, and this is the assignment 1, which is the development and organisation of sport. Okay, so today in this presentation I'll be talking about how sports has developed in the UK. First, I'm going to start with like a little timeline and describe about like the agriculture period, so the 16th century, what kind of sports they did there and how it progressed, and then go on to the Industrial Revolution, so 17th century, talk about how sport developed and improved over the years. Then I'll be going on about the 20th century, so like going through all the centuries, just basically saying how it started and how it worked its way up and developed. And then I'll also go and talk about the history of a chosen sport that I've done and explain how that all developed as well. Okay, so agriculture period. So this was the 16th to 17th century, and this is when England was it was a social order, and it was predominantly farming. So this was when England was farming. They didn't really have any machines. It was just kind of like farm-based, people socialising, and yeah, that's how they kind of made their money in England. So what were sports like during this period? So in this period, the working class, so the lower class, they were mainly working, but they did play some sports, which was, for example, gambling. They did dog fighting, bare fist fighting, and mob football. So they did this kind of lower sports, but they were mostly working. But if they did get time, they played those sports. The upper class, they had a lot of free time, so they had a lot of money and stuff. So what they were doing was they were playing sports like archery, jousting, fencing, and horse riding. So these sports were really key for military purposes, but I'll get on that too in a minute. And yeah, England was developing in machines with farming. So yeah, loads of people invented these machines, and they were using those to increase their farming trade. Military purposes. So archery was used in the military. Archery was considered a sport in the agriculture period. So they used to get, I found out they used to get some really good skilled archers to come in and demonstrate to the soldiers how to do archery, and sometimes they recruited them. This was to help them in the war to get better accuracy with their shooting. Horse riding, the same with the horse riders. They used to train people with horse riding, because in the war, horses were very key to send messages, and they were also used to carry the wounded soldiers, and yeah, just a fast transport. So learning how to horse ride was very key in the army, so they used to train them in that. And fencing, back in the agriculture period, there was no guns, so the only form of shooting was arrows, but mainly it was sword-to-sword combat. So fencing was very key in the military, and they used to train this for battles. Upper and lower class, so like I said, so the lower class did gambling, dog fighting, bare fist fighting, mob football, so not very higher up sports, just kind of lower sports, but they were playing sports. Upper class did archery, jousting, fencing, and horse riding, so yeah, the sports that they used in the army, which was very key. So agricultural society. So yeah, so like I said, farming was very important. This is how people made their money. So yeah, they farmed. That's how they made their living, and it was very social.
Where's everybody?
Farming machines were used to make farming easier. They were really good, just to make it easier. So for example, I've got horse and a wagon dragging a hoe. That was an invention that was made to make farming easier. Ploughs created, obviously, make farming easier, and carts with wheelbarrows just to carry the soil and stuff to place the maize. So so it was just this society was just dependent on farming. That's how they made their living and stuff. Upper class played loads of sports, and there was a huge divide between the upper class and the lower class. So lower class working, upper class were just playing sports and having a lot of fun with their money. Okay, now we're moving on to the Industrial Revolution. So this is when England was changing, they were evolving, so they went from, instead of doing farming now, they were developing new machinery and technology to help them make more money. So this was the period where they were developing in technology, and there was changes. So there was machines like the spinning jenny, which spin cotton wool to produce fabrics and stuff for people in England. They were making new resources like coal and steam engines to help with travel and help with producing products. And they were using basic materials such as iron and steel to build obviously factories and make loads of new buildings and such. Difference between country and city sports. So city sports, you've got the rich, they were playing mob football, cricket, and just like very popular tennis sports and stuff like that, because they had the money from the factories. They were just playing sports for entertainment and stuff. The workers, they couldn't really work, so when they did sports, they did it privately, and they were doing bare knuckle boxing, bear fighting and cockfighting, because they couldn't, because the factory owners didn't want them to work to get injured, because with the rules in the sport back then, there was no rules, so there was high risk of injury, so they didn't want them doing it, so they did it in private for some entertainment. Country sports, so as England built like ships and stuff, they were trading with other countries. What they were doing was they were not only just training goods and stuff, they were training sports. So like we traded cricket to the country, other countries and stuff, and other countries brought their sports over. So like for example, like snooker, pool, hockey, and winter sports all came across different countries. So like countries that had winter climate brought their sports to England, because England's climate is not very sunny like other countries, so we couldn't really play summer sports. So damp climates sports were very key. So they brought that to England, and we started using those. Sports like during this period, so upper caste, that like I said, they had a lot of money from the factories, and they played lots of sports, and they also helped funded sports. I found out like in this time they funded the Arsenal football club. So like there was factory owners that came together, and they just filmed that a little football team, and that's what built the Arsenal football club that we know today. So like they had some money, and they built some foundations of some sport. The lower class, like I said, they had to play in privates because they didn't want to get injured. So yeah, they just played those sports privately, so like bare knuckle boxing and stuff. Upper caste and lower caste. Upper caste, they had a lot of money to play sports. They played like tennis, mob football, hunting, and cricket. So yeah, these were for the upper class because they had money to pay and do these sports. The lower class, they did bare knuckle fighting, cockfighting, and bear baiting. So these are the lower class sports. Didn't have any money. They did it to entertainment purposes. Okay, school system. So during this time, children couldn't really go to school because they were too busy working in the factories. But then there was this Factory Act that came and said they could do, like, they limited their hours in the factory and they could go to school. So that actually helped kids go to school and get education. But then the Factory Act, and then in came the Education Act, which basically said the children couldn't work in factories anymore and they will go into school and get a high quality education. So the effects of sports delivery in the UK, so now the children could go to school. They got a variety of different subjects, but mainly sports, so they got a different variety of sports. So they were learning that what different types of sports are, what they can play, and other different key aspects. Schools now started to add rules and structure to sports. Like I said before, there was no rules, so there was high risk of injury and stuff, and like there was loads of different, there was just no rules, so it was just a bit chaotic. So schools started to add rules and structures to sports, which made it easier to play and easier to understand. Sports were being developed more, like I just said there. They were getting structure, and they were just being a lot more developed, and it got more kids playing sports, which in the future generation, the country would look more healthier, which could help society. Introducing the Educational Act. So yeah, it was introduced in 1902, where yeah, like I said, like the students weren't working in factories anymore, and they were going into education to improve it. Education was very low before the Education Act because they were all working in the factories, so they didn't really learn their basic knowledge. But now, when it came in, it rose up because more students were less in the factories and more into schools. Students got taught different subjects, like I said, a variety of different sports, which was very key, and it allowed children at the age of 10 to start school, and then they introduced secondary schools. So then after you reached that primary school, you went up to secondary school, so then you got even further developed knowledge with better school equipment and teachers. Okay, so rationalisation. I got a definition saying the action of attempting to explain or justify behaviour or an attitude with local reason, even if it's not appropriate. So then I've just broke this down and I made my own little version saying it's a way of someone justifying their actions. So I was talking about how like the government put the Education Act in place to boost education in England, to boost people having more knowledge and making people get better careers in the future. So they were just boosting England's economy. Education, just to help students in the future. So if they had good education, their generation and the generation after would have good education, and it will grow and grow and grow, benefiting England, making them look like a very good country. and the structure of sports would increase as well as people getting more knowledge and there's more structure to the sports. That can only get better and better and better and applying different other sports and different rules and concepts to the game. Okay, so now we're on to the 20th century. So the 20th century, it's between 1900s to thousands. So yeah, this is where there was like a huge development, not only in sport, but like in many things such as technology, huge population growth, development in medicine, science, and historical events such as World War One and Two. So yeah, so like in this period, there was a lot going on, not just in sport, but in everything. So effects of war. So we all know that on the December the 24th, 1914, on Christmas Eve, there was a war between England and Germany, and we were in the Somme. And on this day was very keen for sport because there was a pause, and both countries came up from the trenches and they started to play football. No one really knows the score. People say that Germany won, people say that England won. No one really knows the score because there's not enough evidence. But from that split second, they started playing sport, and there was a truce between the two sides, showing that sport can have a massive effect on the world. Sports. They used sports in the military to help keep soldiers fit, and they wanted to use the skills from sports such as problem solving, strength, agility, and awareness, and many other skills to use in military purposes for the war, which is really key. I found out that sports such as rugby, boxing, and football were sports that show true manhood and leadership. So like they're using really key roles such as leadership and manhood to use in the army for wars and stuff. So they're using key skills from sports in the war, which was very good. And as the men off were fighting, women were in the factories working, but when they had any free time, they were playing football. So yeah, women were playing sports, which wasn't really associated back then, women playing sports, but they started to play sports when the men were at war, which was really good. Technology. So I found out I've got all different dates here saying about how technology developed. So golf got titanium clubs, which helped it easier to shoot in that. Basketball had clocks, so back in time, basketball there was not really it took so long to shoot goals, but then they had this clock in to help speed up the time and get more shots on. Tennis had customised rackets, so they had the metal rackets. Back in the day they were just wooden and they could easily break depending on how high you did the shot, so this made it stronger and easier to play with. Football goal line technology. So yeah, football, if the ball hit the crossbar and hit the line, sometimes it didn't count as goal. This technology found out that the ball, it shows if the ball did go behind the line, it is a goal. So it was just improving technology. Football instant replay. So yeah, if there was a challenge, they could use instant replay just to show if it was a clean tackle, unfair tackle. So just developing the rules. Tennis, there was a Hawkeye and Colossus machine. So this is where in tennis, if they hit it and they could show this little replay of where they've hit it in the line. If they haven't hit it in the line, then they would say it's not a shot, but if it has, they get the point. It's just technology zooming in on the game to see if it's making it more fairer, which it is. So now we're on to easy travel. So during this period, there was a lot of travel that got introduced. So back in the 19th and 18th century, the only way you could travel was horse and carriage, so it's from different cities and that, so it took a long time, but that was the only way you could travel. The other ways you could walk, which took a while. There was not really many transport, so yeah, it was just mainly horse and carriage, and to get to other countries it was by boats, but the boats weren't very that good back then. So in the 20th century there was developed of cars, which got more improved over the centuries. So they were basic models back in the 20th, but then they also got a lot more better. So they were easier ways to transport and travel people because they were minus the horses and it was on the engine, so it took longer journeys and it was easier to travel to stadiums and stuff. Trains, some trains got people from different cities quicker. So if sports fans wanted to go to a stadium, trains could get you there a lot quicker and it was an easy way of transport. Buses took some fans to stadiums, so now buses got introduced where you could go on the bus, you had pay for it, and it would take you to certain destinations. So that got you to stadiums. Airplanes now, they can take fans, but they can also take athletes to different countries, which meant that different athletes from different countries can be introduced to different leagues. So it kind of built on sport a lot more. Boats got bigger and better. They could hold a lot more people, and they could even hold your cars and loads of other different aspects. So yeah, travelling by boat was also a way to get to other sporting events. And like I said about planes, they could also take you to huge sporting events such as the World Cups and Olympics. So that's also increasing that how many people went to the Olympics, producing more people going to sport. And bikes as well. Bikes got introduced, early models, and they got better and better, and people used to just bike to places as well. So that's very key. Okay, so now I'm on to the history of my sport, which is rugby. So this is where, yeah, so rugby is my sport. I found out that it was introduced in 1823 in Warwickshire. Basically, there was a boy called William Webb Ellis who was 16 years old, and he was playing a game of football, and he decided to pick the ball up and start running with it. And this started the distinctive running feature in rugby, which was made in 1876. So I found some information. So there's the famous Gilbert ball, that is the common rugby ball. I found out that William Gilbert was the shoemaker. The balls that we had back in those days were rounder. They were the rounder and larger than they were today. A bit like a football, but a bit heavier. They had pig's bladder inside of them, covered in leather, so it made it a bit more heavier, but that was what the ball was like today. I've got a picture of William Gilbert holding the balls. As you can see, they're really round, made of leather, really heavy. Obviously, leather's quite heavy, so that's quite interesting. So then Gilbert started work with Richard Lincoln, who was a shoemaker next door. He was quite young. They both made the company in 1960, and Lincoln decided to switch the pig bladder inside with rubber instead. So developing that technology of the ball in 1845. The rules of rugby were written. So they were written, and here's a little document here. So they were written and printed out, so then people in public schools can follow it, and it gives more structure to the game. And then I found down here that there was William George Smith, who just basically like telling people just to write down rules, and I've got some names down here as well. Just telling them to write down the rules, just developing the sport. Okay, so I've got some key dates here. So 1946, the offside rule was invented. So basically, the offside rule is if the person with the possession of the ball, you can't be in front of them, so you have to be behind them. So it just like made the game more fair. So then no one had an advantage, because if you're offside, it gives a disadvantage to the team with the ball, so it just makes the game more better. And it also entered the public schools in that year. The shape of the game developed, so there was no positions really in rugby, and you could have up to 300 people on the pitch. And I found out there was a rugby school that had 75 players, and they played against the rest of the school, which had 225. So there's a lot of players on the pitch, and it's really hard to move around and score. So they then started to change it and add fixed positions, so you could have 17 forwards and 3 backs. And then this developed even further by having 8 forwards, 2 fly backs, 4 3/4 and a full back. So as you can see, they're minusing the players by massively, and they're actually putting positions and numbers in place, showing that adding more structure to the game. 1947, the tackle was made. So back in the day, holding and grappling opposition was the main focus of the game. But then the downside to this, it took 15 minutes to take someone down to the ground. So that's really a long time, and it's really hard to score points. So what they did was the RFU decided to introduce a tackle, which basically showed that getting the player down quicker means the game could go smoother and you can have more chance of scoring. 1886, the drop goal was a very popular method of scoring. Back then, the team that could have the ability to do a drop goal was the better side. That was like a really key method of scoring back in the day. And I've got 2 examples of where in the World Cup, Johnny Wilkinson for England, he won it for England and scored this famous drop goal kick, as you can see, against Australia. Very historical moment, but it just showed the level of skill it had in an athlete, and it was really good. And I also found out from Africa, Joel Stansky, I can't really say his name, he's just here. He also did a drop goal in one of the finals as well. So yeah, it was a really hard skill, but it was really effective, and it won some really historical events. And like I said, it was a supreme skill, and yeah. Okay. So now we're on to 1871, first international match. So this was where England played Scotland, and this is the Scotland team. Unfortunately, Scotland beat England by 1 try, so so Scotland beat England, which is unfortunate. But yeah, it was the first international match, so it's showing that the sport of rugby is now being introduced to the world, and other countries are starting to play it. So it's a really good showing a wide scape of the sport, and it's getting out there. The national governing body RFU represented, so then it added like 21 clubs into the rugby, which was really good. So yeah, like I said, first international match, England lost against Scotland. And then there was a movement of rugby, so like there was teams such as like the Australian teams, New Zealand teams. They were all going abroad to different countries and playing each other at rugby, which was very key. There was refs that were introduced in there was no refs in 1885. The captains of both teams kind of made the rules, and they basically just made the rules together, and they were doing it like that, which isn't really fair and not the best way. But yeah, there was no refs, but then they started to introduce them later on. Yes, they introduced them. Evolution of scoring in 1886. So yeah, it could take up to 5 days to score a goal because there was 300 players in the pitch of rugby, which is absolutely bizarre. But then in 1886 they decided to add in some point systems. So as you can see here, so like it was 2 points, and then it went up to 3 points, and then 4 points, and now it's 5 points if you score a try today. So as you can see, they're actually adding some point systems, developing the sport, and in conversions, they were 2 points, and then they went up to 3 points at 1 point, but then they thought that was too unfair, so they've dropped it back down to 2, and the penalty kick is now 3 points. So they're adding point systems, which is a lot better in the game. They started to form leagues in 1895, and in 1900s it also inspired the modern Olympics as well. Oh, and there's a little picture down there showing about like a penalty kick and stuff like that. Okay, so then I've got 1905 scrums, strangling and throttling was common. So yeah, like in the scrums, people would strangle each other and hurt each other, which it was quite common, but it wasn't good. So then they started to implement rules where you couldn't do that anymore because of player safety. 1910, playing advantage was introduced. So this is where like if another team did something wrong and you got the ball back, you could play an advantage. So yeah, like if someone got tackled late by a pass, the ref could say play advantage, and that gives people with the ball a chance to still play on and try and score goals and stuff. So it just gives just lets you play on with the game, so you don't have to stop it. Rugby lost in 1914. Yeah, they lost a lot of players and a lot of stuff during the war. So like loads of players that played rugby in the war had to go off obviously in the war. So they lost a lot of fixtures during the war. So it kind of dragged the participation down quite a lot. Replacements were introduced in 1986, and men that had like smashed up faces or bloody faces. Back in the day, you used to just play on. Now there's like substitutions that can take people that are really badly injured off. So again, it's just developing even more. And then the arrival of yellow and red cards in the 1995. So yellow card in rugby, if you do a bad tackle or a bad challenge, you get a yellow card, which you get sin bin. So it used to be 5 minutes. Now it's like 10 minutes. So you get sin bin for 10 minutes. So it gives you lose a man, and it gives the opposition more chance to score. Red cards is where you do a seriously bad challenge. Like back in the day, you could tackle people when they're in the air, but there's a rule now for the RFU. If you tackle someone in the air, there's a high risk of chance of them getting really badly injured. So that red card basically shows that they get banned for I think it's 5 matches. So it's very serious. And then I've cut it down massively for presentation purposes to 2000 to 2019. I basically just talked about how like technology, so like they started to add scrum caps and body armour to protect your head and body in rugby, because it's a contact sport, so you're going to get injured quite a lot. So they introduced new equipment to reduce that. TMO, which is television match official, so like if there was a try scored but no one saw it, they used this TMO technology which zoomed in on the players and it showed whether there was a bad tackle or a score. So it really helped technology in rugby. And it was really accurate, so it helped like teams win games because it showed like they actually did score or it was a fair tackle, so on and so on. Refs were introduced, so yeah, there was more refs, so you have 4 linesmen, two on each side of the pitch to see if there's people offside or there's a bad challenge, and then you had the one main ref that controls the whole game. Cameras, like I said, the TMO, so to see high stuff. New rules like no high tackling, forward passes, and no tacklers in the air. So like I said, so yeah, high tackle. They realised today that that's a very bad challenge and it can really hurt someone. So that if you do a really bad high tackle, there is a risk of you getting a red or a yellow card. And the same with like the air tackle, like I said. Pitches have improved to Astro, so yeah, like pitches, they used to be like back in the old century, they used to be muddy, wet, really poor material, but they've introduced them to Astro, so like the game flows a bit better and it's a lot better for the players to land on. Players got sponsored and they started to get paid. So yeah, like you see famous rugby players like Chris Robshaw, he's sponsored by Under Armour, so they're getting some big sponsors, which gives them money and it gives the sport money and so on and so on. And lots of countries, loads of small countries now play the sport, such as Kenya, Tonga, Fiji, South Africa, and many more low countries start playing rugby. So it's really out there now. A lot more countries are starting to play it, which is very key. And now I'm going to be talking about the key organisation. So the key organisation is the RFU, that stands for Rugby Football Nation. So this is the national governing body for rugby. It helps develop grassroots and elite rugby in England. Its purpose is to encourage the values of rugby, which is very key. So like teamwork, respect, enjoyment, discipline and sportsmanship. They are very key skills to use in life, and they want to try and promote these skills to young players and athletes to help them in life. But they set rules and regulations as well, so like the high tackles, the RFU got involved with that, and they just set rules and regulations, which is very key, and it helps develop the sport and make it so much better. I also added Sports England because Sports England also help fund so many national governing bodies, and they also help fund the RFU. So yeah, Sports England are a very key organisation. That is the end of my presentation. Here are my references. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for listening.